Hi, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of the Marketing and Consent series. This session is called A Blueprint for Simple Compliant Data Collection. So last session, if you weren't able to join us, we covered the prevalence of this problem in the industry of tracking tags firing after opt-out. How common that is, what the consequences are specifically for marketers. And we sort of talked a little bit about the potential causes and the potential ways to solve this problem. And that's what we're going to focus on in today's session. Some housekeeping announcements first before we dive in. The slides will be shared after this presentation. We'll also be, at the end of this series, doing a Q&A blog for all of the questions and answers that we can't get to at the end of the session. Speaking of Q&A, you'll see that on the chat widget to the right of your screen, there's a tab for Q&A. Feel free to add your questions in there, and we'll try to reserve about 10 minutes or so at the end of the session to answer those. So a little bit about us and what we're talking about today. My name is Matt Davis. I'm the marketing content lead here at Osano. I'm joined today by my colleague, Colin Reinhardt, and Lucas Long. Colin, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Colin Reinhardt. I'm a senior sales engineer here at Osano. So I work alongside our sales team to assist in technical support throughout the sales cycle.
Nice. And as Matt mentioned, my name is Lucas Long. I am the head of global privacy strategy at InfoTrust. We help organizations to get the most out of their marketing and advertising data, but make sure that we're doing that in a privacy compliant way.
Perfect. So we will be talking through a few topics today. The first will be kind of breaking down why consent mechanisms fail, why this opt-out problem is so common. We'll talk about how to identify the right strategy to fix that issue and how to use that strategy to inform your how you implement consent management technology. Then we'll talk about briefly at a high level what a working process looks like. And as I mentioned, we'll save a little bit of time at the end for questions and answers. So last session, if you weren't able to join us or you need a quick refresher, we kind of covered these two research reports that the Osano and InfoTrust team have respectively put together that sort of spell out the scope of consent management problems on websites. So InfoTrust found out that about 79%, 4 out of 5 websites continue to fire tracking tags after opt-out, which is not great, but it's a difficult problem to solve. And most of these organizations are doing their best. About 1 in 4 websites are making 0 changes after an opt-out. That's a little worse. It's either folks are just beginning their kind of journey here, figuring out how to manage data privacy, or they're just not aware of the issue, or maybe they're trying to, they're just not willing to invest in, make the effort to get compliant here. That's certainly contributing to the 12,000 complaints that the California Privacy Protection Agency has fielded since 2023. So they release these enforcement updates at regular intervals, and about 12,000 complaints is the last number they gave us as of March 2026. And so those complaints, they turn into investigations and audits, and those investigations and audits, they turn into penalties, enforcement actions. And on average, that's about a $2 million price tag, which is pretty painful if you get to that point. So all that's to say, it's important to solve this problem of tracking tags firing even after a consumer indicates that they don't want to be tracked. So since last session, we're curious about what's happened on your team. So, have you already audited or changed your existing consent management setup? Are you still figuring out where to start? Have you started looking for a new approach to consent management? Or are you just all new to this and just catching up? Give folks a second to add in here. Lots of new folks, okay. I'm really thrilled to see that a lot of you have already started to look into this about a third or closer to a half. Is this kind of matching your expectations, Lucas?
I don't know about expectation, but I'm happy to see it. Yes, absolutely. Especially after in session one, when we went through, what is the impact of getting things wrong? And it's wonderful to see that people are starting to try to get their hands around that.
Yeah. Yeah, more people are looking into it than have just started. Some folks are looking for new approaches altogether, and plenty of folks are still figuring out where to start. No worries if that's where you're at. I mean, this is a process, right? And the only important thing is to get started, to keep moving. All right, so I'm going to pass it over to Lucas.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Matt introduced, and as we had talked through last week, a majority of websites that were audited for our study did have some issues with consent management. But it's important, and we called out in that research, this isn't due to just willful disregard. In the research, we had identified on the median website has 17 tags that load in general, and only 5 targeting tags are still loading after opt-out. So there's an attempt to being made, but there are still gaps. So what are those most common gaps? Why do we see some of these issues? The first one, and the most common in my opinion, is what I like to call the unknown unknowns. We're just not aware that a particular tag is loading on a website. Maybe a team has added it and it hasn't gone through a proper review process, or something as legacy is still running on some subsection of the website. So those are the ones that fall through the cracks, and those unknown unknowns are the ones that really come back to bite organizations. Second big problem is a consent signal is received from the consent management platform. But if you're trying to manage everything within the tag management system, where you then block those tags based upon that consent signal, things are just not implemented properly. So those tags are still executing even though they shouldn't be. Sometimes that can be an outcome or a result of not having a consent strategy defined. We'll talk about that a little bit here in a moment, but really needing to have a documented policy that people can reference and make sure that everything is being configured properly, as well as associated with that effective process for the review of new tags. That lack of process often leads to tags being either not categorized or miscategorized. So things that you aren't intending to continue loading after opt-out, or when a user only consents to a particular processing purpose, are still loading, again, inadvertently. And then the last piece here is a little more technical in nature, but there are instances where tags will execute before the consent management platform. So when the CMP executes after the tags, you run into race conditions. There's no blocking mechanism that is possible in that scenario. So with these kind of 5 common mistakes, are the things that we typically see. So if you're starting that audit process, like it sounds like many of you are, start thinking about these as some of those root causes. Now, how do we try to avoid this, as well as for all of the folks that are here trying to figure out how to get started? I want to quickly go through just how to approach building a consent strategy, building a consent architecture. Now, when I started doing this with organizations, oftentimes we would start by looking at the tags, looking at the cookies, looking at the platforms that are loading, and then trying to dig through those and the data that they're passing. That works, but it's not always the most efficient way of going about it. So now what I found to be more effective and efficient is kind of reversing that process a little bit. So best place to start is think about on your website, what type of content is there? What type of content are you collecting? What type of information is being presented to your users? And this is where you can really answer broadly on the website. Are we potentially dealing with sensitive data, with sensitive information? Or on a subsection of a website, are we dealing with some kind of sensitive information? That is going to help inform those consent policies and those consent requirements. Once you're able to map that out, you then need to understand what jurisdiction. So are we talking about an opt-out market like the United States broadly? Are we talking about more opt-in methods like Quebec or Europe? So that's going to really outline for you what are those consent obligations that you have. What is it that your users have a right to consent to or opt out of? Once you get there, we then start looking at just generally, why are you collecting information from a website or from an application? What are you doing with it? What are your use cases? We can usually distill those down into standard categories. And those are your categories of processing. That is what's going to be reflected to the user for disclosure as well as for their consent choice. Now we can get to the tags. So now start looking at what are the tags that are loading and why are we using each of those technologies? And we can map those tags then to our processing purposes. And that is really what is defining that consent policy in your consent strategy. Obviously layering some in there based upon your organization, risk tolerance, all of those good things. But following this kind of pure outline allows you to get to a documented position for a consent policy, and then you can build your process and your architecture around that. So once you have that policy, then it gets into more of the tactical C&P items. You need to configure everything to actually follow it. And the big part for that is evaluating your deployment strategy. How is it that you want to configure the CMP? And that is then going to dictate how is it that you need to configure the tags in order to be able to respect the consent choices of your users. And Colin can take us through that a little bit more.
Awesome. So yeah, broadly speaking, we have 3 different methods of implementation that affect how consent is going to be enforced. So we typically recommend that the installation goes in the head element of your site. This ensures that we can intercept tags prior to them being executed in the browser. Alternatively, we do have the ability to install via a tag manager, whether that is client side or server side. The challenge here is that it does introduce much more maintenance, and it can be prone to race conditions, as Lucas mentioned. Regardless of which method you go, there will be maintenance. So it's not to say that if we go the preferred and recommended route, it's no maintenance, but we tend to see much less maintenance, and it's much easier to keep up with the process. Regardless of how you implement a CMP, it will recognize universal opt-out mechanisms like global privacy control. It will maintain an auditable consent record for every user interaction as they visit your website. And it will help to extend enforcement beyond the homepage to landing pages, embedded tools, subdomains, etc. So the important distinction here is that a CMP that is only displaying a banner but is not blocking tags is simply doing that. It's only displaying consent, but it's not enforcing it. And those are 2 entirely different outcomes. So ensuring that you have the appropriate method of implementation and deployment really can help ensure that you are enforcing that consent, which is the most important portion. So this kind of chain is outlining what that working consent looks like from one end to another. So it's loading, it's detecting any opt-out mechanisms in place, it's honoring those, and it's respecting choices as they're updated and blocking or allowing those tags as needed. So compliance really is a chain, and the strategy tells it what to do. The technology behind that makes that happen, and the monitoring and the auditing keeps it honest so you can ensure that you're remaining compliant. If we remove or break any link within that chain, then we reintroduce most of the problem that we that we had prior to implementing any sort of consent. And I think we're going to turn this back over to Lucas.
Yes. So now it is clear, how that CMP is working in order to be able to effectuate the consent choices and selections of users. So we talked about the strategy, how we need to define our policy, outline everything to get ready for that implementation. We talked about how that CMP needs to be implemented. So now we're to a point where everything's wonderful, right? Well, it is at the point of that initial implementation. And what is then critical is ongoing monitoring. So being able to understand as a website changes, as new tags are added to a website in order to be able to support additional advertising campaigns, as regulations change, the only consistent thing is always change. So as those changes happen, we need monitoring in order to be able to make sure that our architecture, our implementation is still robust and is still compliant. So that is where this monitoring piece of the process comes in. Now, for us at InfoTrust, with the organizations we work with, we do use our product tag inspector in order to be able to audit these things on an ongoing basis. But ultimately, in one of the things, because I know a lot of the audience here is marketers and advertisers, the outcome of having that CMP in place and everything configured properly and monitoring in place means that you have a documented position as to what is happening on your website on a continuous basis. And what that does in many cases is it opens up additional opportunities for additional data collection and for additional usage of data that is collected from the website. And this is due to a lot of platforms now offering things like restricted data processing options, whereby the same platform, the same tag can collect data and you can have control based upon configurations for if that data is used solely for measurement, whereby you have more opportunities for collection and for usage, versus if that data is also used for things like advertising. So by having this audit trail in place and by being able to demonstrate that, hey, our architecture is following our guidelines and we have documented guidelines and documented policy and the CMP is in place, it goes a really long way with being able to give the confidence in order to be able to get more out of the data that is able to be collected from the website. So critical not just for the compliance purpose for monitoring, but also to be able to open up opportunities for the business as well.
Okay, so we've talked about a few different elements of like a sort of holistic consent management program. Just to tie them all together, you want to start with the strategy. You want to think about what data you're collecting on your site, why you're collecting it, do you need to be collecting it, and what categories the tags that collect that data will fall into. So generally speaking, there's 4 categories really. For the most part, for tags, there's essential tags that will break if they're blocked. So you never want to block those. There are analytics tags that collect aggregate statistics about your website. There are personalization tags. That's, for example, storing a username in a user and password field. And then there's marketing or personalized or targeted advertising tags. So in order to stay compliant, you usually want to break tags out into those 4 categories. So understanding why you need to collect certain types of data and what tags fall into those buckets is pretty important to figure out how you're going to implement your CMP. And then you go to the technology side of this loop here. So once you have a CMP set up, you can be able to discover tags on your website and put them into those buckets I just described. You're going to be able to enforce users' consent choice. You're going to be able to honor technical signals like the GPC. You're going to be able to create auditable consent records in case a regulator comes knocking, which they do every now and again. And the problem is at this point, like we just talked about, the laws change, websites change. So you gotta watch your implementation as it evolves over time. And then you might return to your strategy and realize, okay, you need to tweak certain things in light of new ways that you want to collect and use data or new regulations that are evolving. So there's two big takeaways on this slide that I want to kind of hammer home. First is this is a continuous process, right? It's a loop. It's not a point in time. Compliance is a habit. It's not an action. If you're hearing that and thinking, well, I have a day job to do, I can't do this all the time. Yes, you're correct. I mean, data privacy is something that happens across every function that handles data. It's a cross-functional thing, and that includes marketing, but it also includes privacy, legal, compliance, your IT team. So you want to partner with those folks on the internal side. And if you don't have the data privacy expertise, reach out to folks like the InfoTrust team or any member of the Osano team. We're happy to talk about how things work at your organization and what what you're struggling with, what your main goals are, especially if it's the first time you're really grappling with all this stuff. So just like last session, we have some homework assignments for y'all. Lucas, why don't you give us our first little task here?
Yeah, first one, which it sounds like a lot of folks on here maybe already taking this step, but verify what tags are firing after opt-out on your websites. Like I mentioned before, the InfoTrust team can help you with a tag inspector scan and audit of the website. There's also our Tag Explorer free extension, which is a Chrome extension. You can just go to a web page, effectuate your opt-out, see what's still loading. And then for the more technical folks, obviously you can look at and analyze the network requests that are being sent in that same type of a scenario.
I think it would be a good idea also to take a stab at trying to see if those consent gaps we described earlier, if you're subject to those on your website. So as a reminder, right, like it's the unknown situation where you don't know what's on your site, so you can't be sure if it's being handled compliantly. There's the idea that your CMP may be passing signals to your tag manager that it's not recognizing and not acting on. It could be that you have no consent strategy defined, no formal process in place. You could have or miscategorized tags, or it could be that the CMP is not the first thing loading on your page. So just take a look at your website and see if any of these seem likely. And if that's the case, then there's a good chance that you may be firing after opt-out.
And the final thing is determining the priorities of your team, but also understanding what resources you have. So who is ultimately going to be responsible or which team members need to be included in this. Depending on the size of your organization, that might be somebody from marketing or legal or privacy if you do have in-house privacy, or on the engineering side. So understanding who is going to be involved in this process and determining the overall priorities is a really great step. And then asking yourself and understanding how you need to or would like to deploy a CMP like Osano and what fits the structure and build of your website best.
Perfect. Okay, we have a little more than 5 minutes left, so we'll try to get to at least a couple of questions. Like I said at the top of this call, we're going to be putting together a blog post at the end of the series. So after next week, which is definitely tune in for that. We got a little blurb there up top on this slide. So don't panic if we don't get to your question, because time is short. And that's the nature of a 30-minute webinar. Okay, well, I think I've got my eye on this question. I think it's going to be for Colin. We had an attendee ask, what role does Google Consent Mode play in ensuring that cookies respect consent signals? Is it mandatory?
That's a great question. It is not mandatory, but if you are using GA4, we highly recommend it. This allows CMP like Osano to communicate back to Google Analytics the consent preferences and provide that additional detail on that side. This can lead to retaining some non-identifiable analytical data, whereas prior to that, without Google consent mode or something similar, you are essentially allowing your CMP to block all analytics. So it's kind of a best of both worlds and provides some control on the side of Google as well.
Let me add one thing just around consent mode. We could have an entire session on consent mode for Google Tags. There are a couple different aspects of consent modes. One are the signals which the Google Tags read from. That piece, which Osano does have built-in support for, that is mandatory because that is what is going to provide the signal that the Google Tags will always be using, which tells Google what processing can be done with that data. So especially if you're a European organization, if you're trying to use, even for a consented user, any data that you're collecting via like a Google Ads tag or Google Analytics for audience creation purposes, if you don't have that in there, Google cannot lawfully process that data for that purpose, just because it's their standard signal. They have to have it in order to be able to do so. So yeah, just wanted to add that in there, in addition to, yeah, absolutely some additional utility when using advanced consent mode for those Google products.
Absolutely. Okay, we had another attendee ask, what about the tags that cannot be identified because the script/cookie/pixel are either cloaked by the source or they simply don't provide us with a clue of their purpose? So yeah, any thoughts on how to handle, I guess, trackers that are ambiguous as to purpose?
Yeah, this can be very difficult in an audit context. And this is one of the primary reasons why when we talked about the consent strategy, also the importance of process. We want to be able to, and most organizations already have process for like security reviews of new vendors. And so what we usually recommend is embedding within that also, I mean, you also probably have data protection assessments and things like that, privacy impact assessments. But building into that, also when one of those vendors needs to have a tag to power functionality on the website, that also would be a part of the tag addition process. So that feeds into the policy so you can get ahead of it. Beyond that, like once you're in an audit, if something's already there and it's, you know, cloaking and whatnot, yeah, it becomes very difficult. You can dig into it. It's more technical in nature, but ideally get in front of it via process around your tag management, your consent management.
Perfect. We have a kind of related question regarding classifying unknown cookies. So this attendee asked, how reliable is AI at classifying unknown cookies identified by a CMP? You know, AI is kind of sneaking its way into all sorts of different software products, right? And I know that we have an AI recommendation classification in Osano. How much should that be trusted, I suppose?
Yeah, so I think it is worth saying that, you know, any AI is going to have some level of potential uncertainty. So we always, you know, we have AI classification built into the Osano platform to assist in that effort. However, we do always, you know, emphasize that it is a recommendation based on our understanding and our research. When it comes to things like first-party cookies that are created by an organization, those are obviously going to not be classified by an AI assistant or agent. So we always recommend that you continue to, you know, do your own research alongside utilizing AI classification, just to ensure that it aligns correctly with your understanding.
And I'll just add real quick. I think we also have confidence scoring, right? To sort
Yes.
of, yeah, to just say like, hey, maybe take a deeper look at this one, or this one's pretty good.
Exactly.
Okay, well, we are just a little bit over time. So as I said, we weren't going to be able to get to every single question here, but we will be putting out a blog at the end of the series to address the ones that we never quite got to. And yeah, just want to reiterate, please be sure to attend next week's session. I think it'll be really exciting. We're going to do an audit of real websites with real consent situations that are going right or wrong, depending on which part of the webinar we're talking about. And yeah, I just want to say thank you, Colin. Thank you, Lucas. And thank all of you for attending and tuning in. And we hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.